Like this.
Well, welcome to Evergo Jamaica's e-mobility forum. The theme today is Charge Forward, Empowering Jamaica's e-mobility vision. And here we have a very technical panel that should help us to get through it. And I'm going to ask all the panelists to introduce themselves, starting first with Ms. Christina Taylor.
Thank you. My name is Christina Taylor. I'm Group Marketing Manager for the ATL Automotive Group.
Thank you. Hearing? Test. Good. Morning, everyone. My name is Christina Taylor. I'm the Group Marketing Manager here at ATL Automotive Group. ATL Automotive is Jamaica's leading and largest automotive dealer. We carry some of the world's most respected and automotive brands, such as Honda, Volkswagen, Audi, Porsche, Kia, BMW, Mini, BYD, Photon, and MG, many of which are leading the charge in the electric e-mobility revolution with advanced technology. Thank you.
Morning, everybody. My name is Wayne McKenzie. I'm the president and CEO for Evergo Jamaica. I'm happy I don't have as many brands as Christina. We only have 2 level chargers, level 2 and level 3. No, that's not true. That's 3. Level 2, level 3, and we have a home charger, which we call Wallbox. Today is about what the customer wants to know about, what the client wants to know about, and our support from the government, the chargers, and our relationship with our charging partner, JPS. Thank you.
Hi, morning, everyone. I'm Brian Richardson, Chief Technical Director for the Energy Division at the Ministry of Science, Energy, Telecommunications, and Transport. Minister Vaz couldn't make it here today, so he's asked that representation from the MSET be done by myself. And so my background largely is within oil and gas, and I know the world is transitioning to electricity and EVs. And so it's wonderful to have the ministry here to be able to outline our vision or intention with regards to our EV policy, which is on our website. And we hope to have a robust discussion this morning.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Nikolai Cohen. I'm representing Jamaica Electric Vehicle Association, JEVA. JEVA was founded in 2021 and consists of about a dozen industry stakeholders. And primarily, we're looking at the advocating for electric vehicle adoption in Jamaica. That bridge between private and public.
Hi, morning, everyone. I'm Dane Kalash. I'm the director at Plug-in Jamaica. And at Plug-in Jamaica, we are here to advance sustainable transportation solutions in the Caribbean, promoting economic savings and environmental preservation.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dion Nugent. I'm from your favorite electric utility company, the Jamaica Public Service Company. And certainly I don't have to introduce our company, but just to say, that we are an organization that believes in evolving to be climate smart as well. And so we have been very active in the space in in terms of the development of the e-mobility sector in JPS. I'm the director with responsibility for business development, and I do have within my portfolio our Charge and Go brand, our partner over there, Mr. Mackenzie, and I support the public charging development in the space. And as you always, we're interested in seeing how we can drive the development of e-mobility in Jamaica. It is critical, it's important for our nation's development. Thank you.
All right, thanks, the panelists here, and I just want to do a little housekeeping before I get on. Just so I said about it, that your phones are on silent, so we just don't get the panelists disturbed when they're answering the question. We're going to jump into looking at empowering Jamaica's e-mobility vision, and I'm going to take questions from the floor as well, but we're just going to start with the panelists first, and I'm just going to throw out the question, and who it fits first the most can answer first. No confusion. But in adopting EVs in Jamaica right now, we started the process a few years ago. What are the main barriers that you're seeing in the adoption of EVs in Jamaica? Maybe the EV man first.
Okay, so I should say part of my background is in logistics and transportation, where I ran the first fully electrified EV fleet in the Caribbean for DHL Express. DHL Express, DHL Express Barbados to be specific. So I'm no stranger to electric vehicle and the workarounds. The barriers I see here, one, the age limit is too short. Based on the fact that 70% or just over 70% of the total imports of vehicles into the Caribbean is used vehicles, then with the current policy we have, it excludes a significant amount of persons from making that transition. Within Jamaica, we have about 80% of the imports being used. No, the age limit that currently exists is too short in order to have adoption, mass adoption taking place in terms of EVs. That's the first challenge I see. Again, most of our imports are coming from the Japanese market, the Korean market, US, Europe, where Japan for EVs is not there yet. So then we need to look at a shift of to where we're getting EVs from. China now picks up the mantle for EVs as the world #1 producer. So price parity now comes into play from that perspective against an ICE vehicle. So hence barriers for mass adoption. Again, size of vehicle, all of those things, we have to make certain that they are correct.
Just interrupt you.
Sure.
When you're using the technical terms, what is ICE?
Sure, no problem. Well, internal combustion engine vehicle. So your typical gas guzzler or gas engine is referred to as an ICE. In that, I'm glad you're listening. So, those are some of the barriers that I see, because at the end of the day, we want mass adoption. The difference in that an EV can make in your life is significant. It changes your driving style. Become more aware because want to make certain that you're optimizing your route, blah, blah, blah. It can make a big difference. I've done it for 10 years being away in Barbados, where, as I said, I run an electric fleet, and I saw the difference it made in the lives of my fleet drivers. They were coming off the road now, not as tired as they used to be driving an ICE internal combustion engine vehicle. The savings significant. Let's see, back
300-kilometer range. And that's not including the wear and tear on the battery. Also, given that new car dealers, they will have a warranty on the battery for 8 years, that gives you the peace of mind, because then if you're buying a 5-year-old car, how soon will you need to change that battery? Also, if there's no authorized dealer, how will you replace that battery? How will you service that car when it's ready for that battery change? So going back to that, it's in terms of adoption, in terms of price point, you no longer have to also look at importing, because the variety of brands that are offering EVs nowadays, it's no longer just the high-end luxury brands which have led the way in the implementation of EVs, but it's also what we call the volume brands. We have Kia, which is Jamaica's most reliable and fastest automotive brand in Jamaica, about to debut a new EV with an 800-kilometer range. You have MG, which is leading the charge. You also have BYD, which is Jamaica's first new energy vehicle brand, selling new cars for 6.95. So there's also now the opportunity. So I wouldn't necessarily say you have to look at that, but there are cars coming in starting at $5 million for new EVs, where you get the full range of the range, warranty, peace of mind, and also the maintenance in service, because persons need to consider as well that, like as you said, you actually only need to service EVs once a year rather than every 6 months.
I'd like to hear from Brian, the government's position on some of what has been said, both Jamaica and Christine.
Right, certainly. Thank you very much. With regards to the question, well, the statement that, about the challenges, I'll certainly say in developing the policy, the ministry had one of the biggest challenges looking at that in terms of the used market versus the length of time before a particular age EV could be imported into the country. And we just heard from Christine saying with regards to the batteries at that time, a 3-4-year-old battery would be a solid waste management issue if it came into the country as a used EV and needed to be changed within a year or two. And so from that perspective, it was seen as the best bet just to limit it to 3 years. And then as EVs improve and that issue becomes less of an issue, maybe that can be extended at some future point. But at this point in time, the 3 years is what we think is opportune. And that's why it's within the policy as it is.
But before I come to that, is that satisfactory from your organization to stick to the 3 years, or you raised the issue of extending the
I would say no, and that's because within our organization we represent used car dealers and also new car dealers. So that balance needs to be there. And again, affordability. How many persons? If 80% of the imports to Jamaica are used, how many persons can really afford a $5 million car? From that perspective, is how I'm looking at it. Is what I mean. We're excluding a significant portion of the population at the end of the day.
What price point I believe is reasonable?
Well, when you look around, what are the cars being sold? The Fits, the small cars. Those cars are not $5 million. Is what I mean. So that is what I'm trying to say, that we're with the price point for the cars that are being sold as used car at a new car level, it is a big difference. Now, I do understand what's happening in the market, where the price point for a new car and a used car, it almost makes no sense buying a used car, because the market now is more geared to buying a new car. It's a lower interest rate versus a used car that has a higher interest rate. So
And longer duration.
and a longer duration. So persons have to understand, and I think that is part of it, that we now have to educate the populace, that we now need to look at: are we going to be a used car society, or are we going to be a new car society at the end of the day? Because the price point between them, really, it makes sense buying a new car, being honest with you. Is what I mean. But can persons really afford to buy it, and do they really see the numbers making that it's not different? It's no difference.
I'm going to come to you. Before I come to you, what's the compromise, though, between wanting a longer, and this is for Brian, wanting a longer time frame, an older model vehicle to come in under the EV thing, vis-a-vis the newer ones, which come in brand new, the 3 to 5 year, is there a compromise that we can arrive at, or is something government saying, okay, 3 year being the oldest in terms of EVs we can import?
Well, the compromise is the 3 years at this point.
That's that.
It is the 3 years. That's what the policy outlines. And so if there's information that changes that position, then we'll certainly revisit it at some future point. But at this point, it is 3 years.
Yeah, but I think in addition to that, I think they're more compromised on sovereign because the first thing when we just started this thing in 2020, we used to pay a lot of money for duties, right? The government did compromise on that. Part of their fiscal space that were affected was duty. EVs are 10%, I think. And initially the minister said 1,000 vehicles. No, it's open. The other compromise is you don't pay when you license a car. But it's kind of weird because we charge. So I'm not agnostic to how people feel. What Christina is saying, and I hear what Nicola is also saying, is if you drive like how I drive, and you sell a car in 5 years, you won't have a battery. If you drive like how Brian drives, you'll have probably 80% of the battery. So a person buying a used car, and I'm in an EV group, we have seen where they would know this, and Nikolai would know this because these guys know EVs. But I've seen where people import used car and the battery is dead. So essentially you're importing a new car, a used car, and you're changing a battery, and for ICE in terms of the price is almost the same price as a car. So the compromise from a sovereign space is what the government has done. The compromise from a lending space is what the banks are now doing. They're giving concession on EVs, and they're giving longer tenures on the EVs, and the warranties are there. The dealers are bringing in the master tech to deal with these cars, and from where we are, JPS commercial sales, we're seeing more people using the chargers, so it means we're bringing in more cars. So it's just for us to continue to promote EV, not just from a decarbonization purpose, but the practicality of the product.
All right, Dane and Dion has been jumping at a bit, but I'm going to ask you, when you're giving the answers, to just expand a bit, because I'm not so sure if all of us are au fait with some of the internal workings of the market. Yeah.
All right, so let's expand on the points made so far. I think both the new and the used have its place. What Nikolai was mentioning is that the majority of the imports are for the used market right now. As possible solution, I hear what the government is saying as well. Instead of looking at an age limit, we should really be paying attention to the state of health of the battery. I mean, Wayne said it. If you drive like him, you probably don't have a battery. If you drive like someone else, you might have 90% state of health. So the state of health really is a measure of the integrity or the health of that battery before it's imported. So we here at Plug-in Jamaica, that's what we did initially. We checked out that as a number one thing, the state of health of the battery. And I think if the government has a metric to say nothing below this percentage should be imported, then you can look at now adjusting the years to balance the affordability side of things. Another step where we could make it more affordable is consolidating not just the fuel costs. Most of us here who work or employed, probably the two major things in your budget is your transportation costs and your light bill. So, right? So if you want to consolidate that, incentivize persons pairing solar energy PV systems at their home with an EV. Then you're working towards energy independence. It also helps the grid. If the grid could have a tariff that allows someone with a home PV system to put back energy on the grid during their peak hours when they need it, and when it's off peak, sell them at a lower rate.
When you say a tariff,
it will help
exactly
to.
What I mean?
I'll allow Dion to probably go into that. That is something that they could look at. It's a possible solution I'm throwing out to balance the affordability, access, and if you want to say max adoption.
But you were throwing out the suggestion. I want you to just explain a bit more.
Well, it's just time of use. So during certain hours, I think it's between 6 and 10, Dion. Is there peak hours? If you have a home solar system and you're producing energy at that time and the grid needs it to supplement, what they're doing, JPS can offer at a favorable rate for both parties. You can sell us the energy to the grid and we can distribute it. While in the evening when they don't need as much load, they don't have as much load on the grid, they can sell you at a lower rate when I can't produce at that time. You understand? So it's something that can come to a compromise that's favorable for all parties.
All right. Okay. So I think from in JPS, one of the things that we have been fortunate to get is a lot of feedback from the public, right? And one of the things I do know, just shifting the conversation just a little bit, there's a need for more public information around electric vehicles and electric mobility. Whereas we do have a fairly reasonable section of our society that knows about it, there's another large section of our society that just totally unfamiliar with it. And I think for that, that's one of the big barriers. People don't really understand it. There's some people feel that it's outside of their range, and it's something we need to break the back of that. One of the things I really believe, if I can get electric vehicles into the taxi sector, the public transport, again, it brings another level of profile to electric vehicles and the kind of affordability that it brings. So I know that people think that the light bill is high, but I want to tell you that all these gentle folks here who use EVs will tell you that the cost in terms of electricity as a fuel is a lot cheaper than going to the pump. But I'll let them testify because, nobody's going to believe me. It's a lot cheaper. And this is one of the things that we're saying. You actually have a product here that is certainly a lot more sustainable, reduces the carbon footprint, and it's actually cheaper. How do we get that into the masses? And one of the things I'll just tell you, I just had a recent experience. As you all know, I've just trying to restore the country back with electricity. I was in St. Elizabeth. I just tried to figure out how do I use an electric vehicle in that part of the island, right? I wanted to be able to go in the hills and the valleys, doing all our restoration stuff. And I being the head of e-mobility, had to work through in my mind as every other Jamaican would. Okay, can the vehicle go up? Can it go down? Where do I charge? I don't live in the area. How do I access those services? And it does say that on the ground, there are certain functionalities that we still need to tackle as a country and as stakeholders to ensure that the adoption rate can increase. I believe we can do it, but there's definitely going to be a need for more aggressive moves in terms of infrastructure and public information. I believe that if you can get into sizable fleets in the country, if you can get, I'm really happy about the JUTC and the work that they have been doing with electric buses. We need to get into the fleet so people can see it and experience it. And they will say, yeah, I think this can work. And so I think that for us in JPS, we are seeing that this is a big part of the issue as well.
Christina wants to answer, but you could put in your answer. What is preventing that adoption? Because everybody has been raising that question before we get to infrastructure.
Thank you, Dashawn. And that's actually what I wanted to touch on, because Dion raised a good point about, that level of understanding by the public on what is an EV. And it could be, a hesitation that this is new technology. they've been driving ICE, they've been driving combustion engine cars all their life. Why should they change now? Yeah. And one thing that all our brands that we are seeing globally is that they had big plans by 2025, and it's actually now by 2030 that all our brands will be offering an electric version of the best-selling models. So, for example, let's take BMW. Everybody might be familiar with BMW X5, which has been a combustion engine vehicle for its entire history. We now offer the X5 plug-in e-hybrid, and we'll be offering the all-electric X5. So this will allow persons to be able to adopt. And one thing that all the brands are committed as part of global sustainability is offering an electric version. So there will be more electric products coming out. So it's not a matter of if, but when, because persons will eventually have that. Like, I love this car, but now it's only available in an all electric. But we will get there because of our public and private sector partnerships and the charging, going back to what Dion mentioned.
But we've seen some brands make plans for EVs 2030. This morning, Volvo said that they won't be, Volvo's going to go all electric by 2030. Yes. This morning, they came out and said, we're not going to do that again because demand is falling. You have seen companies like Apple had plans to do EVs. They withdraw out of because they are citing also lower demand for it. We've seen the troubles happening with coming out of China, with Europe and the United States and now Canada imposing tariffs on it. It's going to impact the Chinese market. The Chinese are looking for other places to sell. Yes. And thing. How can we navigate those to
So-
ensure we get some benefit.
So going back to what you just mentioned, there has been a global overall demand that they have seen a drop. Brands and companies and all the markets have seen a drop in demand for electric vehicles, but that doesn't mean it actually has stalled or stopped. The plan is still there. It's just a matter of extending. So a lot of brands, like you mentioned, Volvo, were saying they were going to discontinue, but it actually is just a prolong. So they will offer combustion engine vehicles and the mild hybrids, the plug-in hybrids for now, before making the move to fully electric. But the plans are still there from what we're seeing.
All right. You mentioned the public transportation system, especially taxis, and getting them adopted. But one of the things which drive EVs and adoption is infrastructure. And yourself and Evergo are putting in the infrastructure that we need to have. But I think you mentioned you're having, repeat the type of infrastructure you say you're having, tier 2 and 3? Level 2 and level 3. Explain a bit how important that infrastructure is in pushing adoption, because a lot of people are worried about the range of EVs and how quickly they can get a recharge for their batteries when they run out of charge.
Yeah, I wish Dan wasn't here, but I just look with everything. It takes time, and I remember when we had our launch in 2020, we didn't have a battery electric vehicle at that launch with a plug-in hybrid. That was what the country had. Christina spoke about the introduction of EVs being on the high-end market. We started with a Jaguar I-Pace, and so that was how we started. Now we have BEVs, BYDs, right? So the first charger that we had two chargers, one in Kingston and one in Montego Bay, and I was to drive the Jaguar from Kingston to Montego Bay to see a feel. And I can tell you, I know what it feels like to run out of gas driving an EV, to the point where I said to my guys, if we don't put a charger in Ocherius, I'm not driving an EV because it makes no sense. Now you transition from 2020 to now, we have 70 chargers on the ground. So when I hear Dan saying she was in the parish of St. Elizabeth and she wanted to know if she could go over the hills and the valleys, I was saying, well, if she have electricity, she can use my chargers because we have a lot of chargers in St. Elizabeth, right? I could have named the places, Nola's and all of those places. But the reality of the situation is though, initially it was range anxiety because we didn't have enough. Now, collectively between JPS and ourselves, if you triangulate where all the chargers are, you can drive from Marant Bay to Negril Point and back, and it's covered by chargers, right? Some of the issues that we have though, and still remain, are the integrity and the stability of the grid. We have a lot of issues where our charges are concerned, and Dan probably has that on her charges as well, where you have a lot of fluctuations on the grid. More so on the southern side of the island. In Kingston, it's very, very, very good. So reliability and availability of chargers in Kingston, St. Catherine, St. Anne is really, really good. When you get into the southern side of the country, Manchester and St. Elizabeth, it needs some fixing up. Another thing that we need to do, and I'm throwing it out here, Dion, that the distribution space need to be designed through the tariff to accommodate and receive charging station. Because we have to be building out the distribution network whilst we're putting in the chargers. It's costing us 4 times what it costs us to just put the chargers down, because we have to be putting in poles, we have to be putting in lines, or putting in transformers. Simply because
you want JPS to build that infrastructure and then you
connect. I mean, I have one customer now. I have a very, very, not customer, I have one boss. I pay a light bill. I don't have difficulty paying it though, because it's still 60% cheaper than buying gas, right?
To run an EV.
Yes. So I don't have a difficulty paying JPS. If I put on the transformers, I'll put on more chargers. So I'm pleading, everybody here on the forum, that we really do get that through the tariff, so we can put the chargers down. But right now, though, I can tell you, and Christina and ATL is one of our signature partners. I can tell you that. We have a number of agreements with them. Christina and I fight a lot. about where she wants to own my chargers. But the reality station is we do follow them, they follow us, and we have the same relationship with Stewart's, with all the dealers, and they are now more comfortable in bringing in more vehicles. They have like 12 different lines. We're not talking about brands, we're talking about lines here. And each line has like 6 or 7 different brands. If you look at BYD alone, you probably have like 10 of them, don't it? Well, 8. So let's get 2 more. But but that's how it's going. Yeah, so Dion, I don't know if you have anything.
Before you come to Dion, though, you mentioned the saturation of chargers across the island, but you never addressed the issue of that. One of the fears in adoption is how long it takes to charge how quickly
Okay, so you have,
charge a vehicle.
as I said to you before, you have 2 type of chargers. You have level 2 and you have level 3s. When we just started, because we had more plug-in hybrids in the country, both JPS Council has put in more level 2 chargers, which charges the plug-in hybrids, which is those that can use gas and electricity. Now we are seeing a transition to BEVs through the dealers and the gray market. We're now putting in more level 3 charger. Our colleague over there, JPS, has stepped up the game where we started with, the country started with 50 kilowatt chargers, and they're now at 150 kilowatt chargers.
I'll get into 350.
When you buy an EV, we'll definitely get to 350. But it just goes to show that the business model is changing, it's adaptable, and we ourselves are looking at putting in some 150 kilowatt chargers. One thing that I'm realizing about charging, and the users will tell that you really shouldn't charge beyond 80% of your battery. If I go on a 50 kilowatt charger, I go on a 150 kilowatt charger, charging between 20 and 80% is 15 minutes tops, right? That's what I'm realizing.
No, repeat.
Between 20% to 80% is 15 minutes tops. Between 80%, which is one of the things why people say it take long to charge, between 8% and 20%, sorry, between 8% and 100% is 45 minutes.
But also say it
And between 98% and 100% is 10 minutes. So you really, I'd say 15 minutes. 15 minutes on a level 3 charger.
But still, that would be a discount for persons who drive into a gas station can get through in 2 minutes. That's why I'm asking about the 350. Anyway.
So, Dashan, going back to what we were talking about with the advancements in technology, and that's exactly what Wayne just referenced. All the new cars nowadays we spoke about ultra long range batteries. They also come with fast charging capabilities. So that difference between going from 20% to 80% can be as short as 15 minutes. It's on average with new cars, 25 minutes tops to get to that. So that's also one of the reasons why but you also spoke about, you go to the gas station and it takes you 7 minutes to fill up. That's why we're also looking at JPS and Evergo, which they'll touch on more, is that we're looking at installing charging stations at locations that are convenient to the consumer. So that could be if you go anywhere in the world, to a first world country. So you go and you will see chargers at malls, restaurants, shopping centers, banks, anywhere that someone can go in. So what, in essence, where we need to be and where we will be in the future is you can go to the supermarket on a Saturday, you have a designated parking spot with a charging station. You go, you plug in your car, you do your shop, you come back and you're fully charged.
Yeah.
Thank you. So again, the question about infrastructure, and I thank Wayne for highlighting that we now have 150 kW chargers because the market is changing, and the fact is that nobody's going to sit down for half hour or 45 to an hour to charge. That's the reality. So we started out with the slower chargers, which are the level 2 chargers, which would take about that time. We didn't have a lot of vehicles on the road, but the demand was we wanted level 3. We found that our level 3, just 1 or 2 at the time, that was what everybody was using. Clear signal. We're not interested in the slower charge. We want to get to the faster charge units. And so we have been steadily increasing that. One of the things we also have realized with infrastructure is the standards around the plug type. So ATL and Stewart's and ourselves, we have had to have that little round robin in terms of when they're bringing in vehicles, every vehicle has its particular plug type. So the standardization around plugs is very important. I'd hate for you to drive up to a charger on your way to Mobile and it's the wrong plug. and so we have had to have that conversation and even adapters. So standardization is something that was also articulated in the EV policy. We believe that's something that also has to be aggressively pursued in order to ensure that people feel comfortable and not totally distraught. I know the reality of range anxiety, just as, he has called me several times to rescue him. So, and I've called him to rescue me. So we both understand the difficulty of range anxiety. And that's why having that infrastructure across the island, wherever you are, no matter where I am, I want to be able to access it, even though I don't live in the space. I want to also respond to the grid side. It's clear that electric vehicles and e-mobility has to work in tandem with the grid. That's a reality, right? Yeah. And I can tell you that, in our space in JPS, the thinking has had to shift, especially since the recent storm, right? In terms of a relook at our infrastructure and how does it support where we want to go in terms of being climate smart. Mm-hmm. And so, I will join with Wayne and said, we need to relook it and to begin to understand how does this charging infrastructure remain sustainable in those emergency situations, right? You want to make sure that you have resilience built into it as well. It's not just for blue sky days, wonderful days, but how do we incorporate that resiliency factor into it? And I don't think that conversation has happened as yet. And so before this lady with our two little children go anywhere in a EV, we have to answer some questions for her, right? So that she understands that when she gets there, there's a charger that works on her vehicle and that she's able, wherever she have to go, that she can be able to safely take our children back home. And that's something that I remember when I started in the early days, it was women that we found, these questions. Men are a little more adventurous, but you have to solve these questions, especially for persons with family and children. And so we know that infrastructure piece is something we have to relook going forward.
But before you go on the matter of the infrastructure and the adoption and the lessons from burial.
Yes.
As you have put it, and the gaps that you have found. What are some of those gaps? Expand a bit more on some of those gaps you found, which the JPS and the government or anybody has to solve to get adoption of EVs.
Well, one of the things I definitely know, we need more chargers. we definitely need to have more charging locations. I think that even outside of burial, persons want to feel comfortable that when I go out there, I can see one. Just like you see gas stations, I want to be able to know that those are there. And I think that's a big part of it. And that was my challenge as well, in going out into the space, really saying, am I comfortable that wherever I am able to access that.
Did you have an EV?
Company for now. Working with Christina. All right. So, so being able to access that, I think a gap also for me was the vehicle itself, trying to make sure I had a vehicle that could do the kind of functionality that we wanted to, because we were going into some very, some treacherous areas as well in terms of terrain and so on. You wanted to make sure that you had vehicles that could do that and vehicles that can probably take loads, right? So those are some of the questions that electric vehicles eventually will have to resolve for us as we think of how do we expand in the era. Today, I think that we have very good uptake in terms of the types of vehicles that we have. It suits general functionalities, but for some of us in specific areas, we know that there are other things that we will want, which are currently gaps, and the market is attempting to solve those.
All right, you wanted to... Before, I want to come back to the infrastructure a bit, but...
Yes, actually, it's still on infrastructure. So what we found, just like talking about range anxiety, what persons also receive when they purchase a car from a new car dealer, from ATL, what we included in part of our package, is persons receive a complimentary home charging station and free installation. So they can charge every night if they need to as a top-up. So as an EV owner, you actually won't find that you're going out every day looking for a charger, wondering where is this charger. But also Evergo has a brilliant app that shows them where all the chargers are so they can open it. And charging ports. So that's actually not something, if you as an EV owner are thinking about every day, where am I charging? Because you're charging at home. And then the technology in the cars allows you to be able to see, okay, I have 600 kilometers left range. I know if my day-to-day includes, I'm going to pick up my kids, etc., etc. So you actually find that they won't charge externally on a very regular basis. JPS and Evergo can speak more to it, but you have the comfort and the peace of mind knowing you can charge every night. You leave your car plugged in overnight, you wake up and it's at 100%. And that could actually take you for a week, 3 days a week, depending on your driving style, depending on where you're going. For Wayne one day, but we know how he's driving. But realistically, you actually don't need to charge every day. So it's not something that's on top of your mind because you have that peace of mind.
All right. I know.
So I was going to go there.
Sorry.
Because I noticed we weren't speaking about the home charging.
No, you can
Okay.
use the microphone.
So Plug-in Jamaica will also get into it. So that's an interesting and an important part of owning an EV. About 95% of the time, you're going to charge this vehicle at home.
Yeah, I think I was here last week, and the person was saying they set up the charging station at your home.
Yes.
For you.
Or a location of your choice, so it can be your office, etc.
But one of the things that was raised is if you live in an apartment complex, in terms of the strata, you may have some problem setting up the charging stations with the strata.
That I can speak to, because when I lived in Barbados, I had the same problem having an EV and can't charge at home. And literally, it was a townhouse, and I could put the wire through and put it on the wall. I couldn't do anything else, but I was fortunate. I was at the end of the property. So that was okay for me to do. But typically here with the apartments going up, it's going to be a problem in the future unless a situation where we have designated spot, maybe Evergo or a JPS.
No, use the microphone.
Evergo or JPS can do something like that. It is something mega power equivalent to ATL did in Barbados.
We have developers approaching us about
I was going to get to that, asking what
putting charging
policies are in
station
place.
in their common spaces. So where these complexes are concerned, that's kind of what they're doing now. And for those with townhouses, they'll put the chargers in the garages. But we have had approaches by developers to install chargers.
And that's been worked out. I mean, between the government, the developers, the people. I mean, if you live in the middle of an apartment complex, some of these high rises going up, and the parking spots down are limited, how do you?
Well, we have. I mean, if there's anything that this country is good on, is regulation, right? So when we have earthquake, nothing happened to our buildings. So the same thing with electricity. The government has a very, very good policy where that is concerned. So developers would have gone to JPS because they would look at the design. They would have already modeled the units for those chargers. So all that would have been done. So it's part of the infrastructural framework. And once approved by the government inspector and JPS can approve it, then it's just a matter of installing it. So they're doing that now. A lot of developers are including and introducing this green space in their development.
All right. Before you go on, you're going to respond? Okay. Before you go on, say what you said.
No, so with regards to what you're hearing from all the panelists here, the foundation for the discussions lies within the EV policy that the ministry has put together. It's allowed brands to come in island because we have a policy in place. The matters that you speak about with regards to charging stations in apartments, there is a directive or a guidance within the policy as to how that should be handled.
And what's that?
I can't remember the specifics, but it's saying if you're having a couple of parking spaces, X amount needs to be for an EV with regards to that. So it's looking to ensure that EVs in new buildings that are coming up and even existing buildings are contemplated or at least looked at in a very specific way. Because what we have to ensure, and what the policy does ensure, is that we have the kind of standards that are internationally robust, and so that Jamaica has an EV ecosystem which is internationally robust.
Right,
and everyone here can certainly say that's what the policy provides.
I want to open the floor. I don't want to monopolize it. Anybody has any questions they want to raise quickly? Al? Wait, we need a mic. Yeah, need a mic for the. Oh, we have to go there.
No, we're gonna put it in place.
Yeah, and then I come back. And I mean, if you have any questions, you want to raise the questions throughout the thing, you can just indicate to me. I'll just stop. All right, and give you the chance to ask a question.
No, understand.
Stand. They want you on camera. They want you on camera.
Oh, really?
Yes. it's broadcast live online.
Just a quick question. We do know EVs are the way of the future, but in the interim, it will cause a degree of displacement. I'm thinking about, as we live in Jamaica, you know, a local mechanic, someone who says to you, look, take the car around, I'll look at it. But you won't have that with EVs. I mean, I don't think we're at the level yet where you have many people who can handle these EV vehicles. From a mechanical point of view, what say you to that?
Thank you for that question. So JPS, through the JPS Foundation, has been working with the IDB Lab on a project called Building a Sustainable E-Mobility Ecosystem for Inclusion and Access, short version, Project eDrive. And under that project, we actually have a component completely dedicated to capacity building. So what we have actually partnered under that project with HEART for the development of EV training, mechanic and first responder programs that was implemented last year. So that program is actually operational. We were targeting 400 persons to be trained. We went through the cycle of training the trainers out of the UK. We got certification from an entity there. And so we believe that we have started a robust process of ensuring that we have a strong cadre of mechanics who can manage EVs. And we expect that that program will be institutionalized in HEART. And therefore, we hope to have checked the box for that question.
But I think you'll be referring more to the current existing mechanics that are
right. So
I
want to tell you that we started out with first responders, but the interest has come from existing mechanics and purposes in the existing industry. They want to understand the vehicles. They know that they're here. And so the program is open to all of them.
Okay, Chris, Dane.
All right, very good question and very good answer there. But I can speak as someone driving an EV for over 5 years here in Jamaica. It's very similar to an internal combustion engine vehicle. The only difference is really your battery and the motor. That's different, right? So any mechanic you have, the mechanic was servicing my RAV4, services my Nissan Leaf. So unless I have a major component issue, then I would need some of that technical expertise with the battery or the motor. But generally, the motors don't give issues. EVs are understood to be more economical if you're maintaining it and easier. It's literally a battery and a charge on the frame and the motor. Simpler in design, so it's easier to fix.
But still don't take it to an under-tree mechanic, right?
Right, no, don't do that.
Let me certainly address the question that you raised. It's one of the issues that was raised in the policy, and it sets out the basis for which JPS just spoke about their foundation and the IDB with regards to the training, because we know that has to happen. The first responders have to get that training. With regards to the
first
servicing,
responders being who?
Fire, police, the first persons that come on the scene of an accident need to understand the safety requirements around an accident, probably involving an EV. And so they have to be trained. And all of that is facilitated through the policy. And that's why you're having all those behind the scenes things taking place. With regards to what was just spoken about taking your EV to any person, that's not something that we would certainly support. The policy doesn't support that. It has to be persons that are authorized to work on that vehicle and understand how the nature of electricity actually works, because this is very different than an ICE car, an internal combustion car. And so I wouldn't support just taking your EV to anyone. It has to be to someone who is authorized to work on EVs or the dealer who has provided that EV.
Christina?
Thank you. And I do have to seriously commend JPS for leading that charge on the training, because that is actually something we've seen, and it is not just the first responders, but also the training and the technical, because you find that, and we at ATL have partnered with JAGUS. We have done trainings with the Jamaica Fire Department to be able to extract, because going back to what was mentioned beforehand, in the event of an accident and someone is trapped in a car, in the way that they would be trained normally to be a first responder to extract them from the car. Persons, you can't hack the door off. per se. You know, they're wires. These are 1,000 volts. You could be electrified. So there must be training to be able to go in. And it's the same exact thing with servicing. These cars are computers on wheels in the safest way to say this, because it is electricity on wheels. It is electricity. It is high voltage. It is, and this is why we also commend that when you purchase an EV, you purchase through a dealer, because we have internationally trained technicians. This is not a cliche says to say service at your dealer because you will void your warranty, but we undergo rigorous. I wish I could explain to you the thousands of hours we spend on training, but it's not just training for the team members and the trainers who are going to work on your car, but there is millions of dollars. There's special equipment, there's special tools. We have what we call EV service rooms, which are specifically built to service cars in the event of a fire. They self-contain, they shut down, they flood with water, and only your local dealer will have access to that because it is specialized training that are. And with each car, it is also different. So servicing a BYD is not necessarily the same as servicing a Tesla or an Audi or a Nissan Leaf. They are all different and they all require different skill sets and tools that only a dealer or someone who is trained to service on an EV will have.
All right, Karina.
Hi, good morning. Karina Bennett from the Observer. So the first question is to you, Dion. You spoke about with the lessons from burial and infrastructure gaps. You spoke a lot about the gaps, but not really so much about some of the potential fixes or opportunities. So can you speak a little bit more about maybe any of the potential opportunities that exist to fix those gaps?
All right, thank you very much. So where we are now is really doing that review, right? So infrastructure for EVs and resilience of it really has a lot to do with the current configuration of our grid, right? Very heavy investments there, right? So you have to be very careful how you start to promote solutions, right? There is a cost and somebody has to take up the cost. So where we are, yes, well, but it's a conversation that we have to have, because if Jamaica is saying that this is where we want to go, then what does it take to get there? And we need to, contend with the costs. The fact is that, we need to look at how our grid can serve to be able to withstand major events, climatic events like that. And so what we are currently doing is working through a resiliency plan to be able to indicate very clearly what do we need to have in place to support this. So what I'm saying is that I'm not going to be giving you the specific answers now. Why? Because it needs a more robust review coming out of the recent experience. So consider the West, the southern and western parts of the island that got the most significant hit. We have very extensive distribution networks in those areas going for hundreds of kilometers of line. And we're talking about how can we ensure that somebody at the end of a 400-kilometer line have that level of resilience? What would it take, right? And it demands creativity. It demands discussions with our partners in terms of what does it look like. Because the reality is we could be looking at maybe some microgrids, right? Microgrids, I need to define that, right? Again, it's a conversation, right? What does it take to get us to that? How do we deal with those costs? And where are the best places to actually put those kinds of solutions? And again, this is about making sure it's a win-win-win for everybody. How do we begin now to step back and relook the path to get to this thing called sustainable grid and a sustainable infrastructure? So let me just leave that for now before I get into more trouble, right? Okay. But what I left was we need to step back and we need to relook this thing together in the energy sector. What does this thing called the grid look like and how do we want it to operate?
I want to get to that follow-up. Do you have a follow-up?
It's not directly.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so the other question that I have is for Mr. Mackenzie. So EV has been in the market for quite a number of years now, and you spoke earlier about seeing some growth, year-on-year growth, right, in charger use. So I'm trying to get a better sense of what does that growth look like, and also to understand overall performance for Evergo. What does sales look like, bottom line look like? Christina spoke, they were having a from Evergo's side, because we're in the market to make a profit at the end of the day. companies do business to make a profit. So
Yeah,
it's
we
just the technical
we thought that
question.
when we started with Evergo, but we're building our distribution network now. So anyway, you early on, it's kind of weird because JPS gone ourselves, and I have to say JPS gone ourselves. Kind of took a responsibility. I was going to give JPS some props, right? So JPS gone ourselves took on the responsibility of e-mobility.
Building out the infrastructure.
The responsibility of e-mobility, because we had users who charged at home, but we didn't have anybody who believed that could drive to any particular destination without charging. And we had dealers who now have 10 lines and 8 vehicles in a particular line who didn't have an EV because they didn't have charging network on the ground. So we kind of have a dog wagging its tail. And now we have Sovereign, and I'm not saying anything bad about the government because I love them. But we had Sovereign who believed in the decarbonization process and also supported the e-mobility space. But the synergies and the integration of all of the basic tenets that make it work never happen. So JPS and ourselves invested in an industry, right? And it is going to be a loss-making entity until the volumes are there. So what we're now seeing is a proliferation of new vehicles coming in. We're seeing more BEVs than plug-in hybrids, so they're consuming more power, so we're getting more revenues. It's point of inflection where we should be. Is it that we're making money now? For it to be successful, the answer is going to be no. Because as Dan said before, and I said to you before earlier, we were started with level 2 chargers and they're relatively inexpensive. Then you go to a 50 kilowatt charger and they're pretty expensive. When you move to 150 kilowatt charger and you're bringing in, you're purchasing transformers, purchasing distribution poles, you're purchasing lines, then all of that aggregate makes the cost stream that much, much more. Is it prohibitive to cause a business to die? The answer is no. But we're not in the black as yet, but we're approaching there.
Yeah, just before Karina goes on, and you mentioned the grid, I have to ask you, both yourself and JPS, Charge and Go, and Evergo, everybody go. Both of you building an infrastructure ahead of demand for it to allow people to realize that, hey, if we do acquire an EV, we will do away with charging. We'll be sure that we'll have some infrastructure to charge, but the grid itself is something I think we should look at as well, because as Jamaica doesn't have a mandate like in the United States, where President Biden says by 2030, at least half of new car sales must be EVs. We have not had a policy like that, but we're building infrastructure for more EVs, which means that we're expecting to be charging more. How stable is the grid to manage that? How much more would have to build out in terms of the grid to manage the EV infrastructure that we want to build, in addition to the other areas in our society which want to use electricity? The government has mentioned turning us into a high-tech society. If you're using things like AI and stuff like that, it's going to be pulling more electricity from the grid. You have different competing demands for power on the grid along with EVs. How is the grid infrastructure, the stability? What should we do to get? So you generate electricity as well.
Speak on that as well. All right, so it's a very good question, because we're talking about how do we holistically plan for this future that we want, right? And the grid is a big part of this equation. And the starting point, I would say, is our integrated resource plan, which takes us, our look ahead in terms of demand. And that I believe will become the definer of all of these various pieces that makes the grid a robust one. So currently, we are focused on generation and transmission. The piece that is going to really become more important coming out of this exercise is what happens on the distribution, because the distribution is what touches you and what touches me. And what we as JPS are currently
But you have
doing.
to generate something to distribute.
Yeah, sorry, yes, right. So I mean, you're generating, you have to distribute it, right? So we're trying, so we I think we have the first two steps. The third piece is what is most critical now. And so let me put something to you. So JUTC, if they were supposed to go 100 electric buses, what does that mean for the grid, in one location? And so that's a part of the exercise that we as a company are beginning that scenario testing. How do we support that kind of activity? If you have mass expansion of EVs, what will be required for the grid? What kind of infrastructure do you need to have in place in Manchester, in Portland? What does that look like? And be able to 3, 4, 5 years ahead, prepare for that demand. And so it's a question of planning, and that planning currently goes through our the ministry, JPS, regulate, all other critical stakeholders are a part of that. The good thing is that we are still ahead of that inflection point.
How far ahead?
How far ahead?
Behind?
Well, I think that we're probably just a few years, we're maybe about 3 or 4 years before we see. No, they are not. Don't be like that. I'm hoping that is within 2-3 years we will see a significant inflection in terms of the growth. I think we were looking at about 2025, 2026 to see EV growth take off, right? So we're just a little bit ahead of it, but it means that we're in the zone right now for more aggressive planning around that. But you don't want to spend. You don't want to spend and it's not realized, because you remember this is cost that somebody has to.
But what informed that point to say by 2026? What was the thing?
So these were just projections based on what happens in other jurisdictions. So there, we all have forecasts in terms of what we expected in terms of the growth of EVs. I have Dane who.
Dane and
So let me just say quickly that the policy outlines a target for 2030. It's 16% of GOJ vehicles. 16. Yeah,
of
16.
the government of Jamaica,
yeah,
only
public, right?
State-owned.
Shifting to EVs, and the target is 12% for private sector. Now, the hope is that by 2050, we'll get to 100% EVs within the GOJ fleet as well. That's what the policy outlines. And so the shift is certainly set in stone, so to speak, within the policy. And we're looking to ensure that all of our agencies, ministries, if they're taking on new vehicles, they take on EVs.
Okay. Karina.
Right. Okay.
Oh, all right. Dane, you want to add?
Well, it was just a follow-up to what Dion was saying with I don't think it's a JPS alone to issue to solve. Like Dion was saying, it needs some more inclusion, some more review on it, and look at how we approach this whole energy situation here in Jamaica. I spoke to earlier about solar paired with batteries at home to take off some of that pressure, aiding the main distributor supplier of electricity on the island. But even looking at legislation, how is it that we treat electricity? Is electricity a fuel? How do we think of it in terms of, for example, with gas? You have different branded marketing companies. Total, you have Texaco, you have Fesco. Can we treat electricity in a similar manner where it is generated, yes, by one provider, but then you have different marketers? You have Evergo. Can other people come in the space? Can somebody come in with a solar battery charging grid like you have GridSurf and Fastnet in Netherlands? You have opportunities like that where we can tap into. We need to think outside the box, and I think everybody can take a piece of the pie, and it will be beneficial.
Take a pie. I never go pie.
Following on that, in the same St. Elizabeth scenario, if we had more solar coupled chargers there, then wouldn't need to worry, right, Wayne?
But then you're talking about also battery storage,
battery storage, all of that from that perspective. So it's a full conversation that needs to happen to sort this out. I would say about 2013, I was part of a similar discussion in Barbados when Megapower, the equivalent of ATL, was now bringing in electric vehicles and had a discussion with stakeholders, open discussion they were having with Light and Power, Barbados Light and Power, then and the public, just to look at how the changes are going to happen. Now Barbados has probably close to 2,000 EVs on island. We're the number one selling car is an EV. Price parity is there. So I've seen the changes. Changes are going to come here at the same time, but it's going to have to be a full stakeholder discussion and involve the public because things are going to change.
Wayne hasn't added before Kerner comes in on the infrastructure and build out. You throw it to, leave him alone?
Thank you, Neville.
I think it was.
I just feel targeted.
So it's seen slow but steady growth, it seems, in Jamaica. But
I would call it slow.
You would call it slow? Okay.
But we are coming from a low base.
Zero.
Yeah.
From a dealership perspective.
Okay.
What more than 250?
No.
250?
Yeah. And I'm getting stats from the dealerships and it's growing. So I wouldn't necessarily call it slow.
Okay.
I could speak to it a little bit more definitively in terms of the numbers that we're looking at since 2020. I think it was about 36 or so that was imported in 2020, and in 2023, I think it was 270, just under 280 EVs imported, and so we're seeing a robust increase, certainly.
Okay. Right. No. So the question was really about we're seeing growth in Jamaica, but then there are concerns globally. With some of the players saying that they may delay some of the projects. It's just to get an understanding if you're concerned.
I'll speak to part of that. Ford is delaying project, but yet still Ford has growth of 31% year on year. Is what I mean. So it may not be the number, maybe they wanted 50, but they still have growth 31% year on year.
But most of the growth the slowdown demand is in China. For the EVs, especially the Western car companies.
In China, on which side of the market?
For Western companies.
For Western companies, right? Because more persons are buying Chinese made vehicles than legacy manufacturer vehicles. That is what's happening because legacy manufacturers took too long to catch up. Simple, plain and simple. So the Chinese have become the monster in the room, but they created that monster, and the Chinese are going to run with it.
Okay.
Which is why you spoke to earlier, the Canadians now starting to increase tariff.
We not go follow them, right?
We won't be down.
Javon.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Javon Keys, Television and Radio Jamaica. So my question is for perhaps the dealerships and government here, because we are now talking about increased EVs, but there's the other side of the conversation regarding e-waste. I wanted to find out whether or not electric waste.
Okay.
Meaning now that we have all of these vehicles when we get rid of these internal combustion engine vehicles, are we going to sell them to scrap metal? But then when we have these other vehicles and they get to another part of their life cycle where the batteries have died, what are the processes now in place as it relates to that end of life for these units? So I guess it's for both of you because I want to hear from the policy perspective and I'm sure from the
Nikolai and Christina.
And maybe we can hear from the association.
Right. So with regards to that, the policy had to look at that in a very definitive way. And that's why I'd spoken about why we have a 3-year limit. And there's also, it touches on the point of what happens post battery, and that is giving a second life to the batteries, maybe repurposing them. That is also handled within the policy as well. So that
repurposing them is pretty
repurposing, right? So persons may think of maybe EV battery is beyond its state of health right now for a car, but it certainly could be used within a house for battery storage and use during the days. And so that repurposing is also looked at within the policy, and it outlines some additional standards with regards to how that is supposed to be done. And so it's a good document to look at just to get an understanding of it. E-waste certainly falls within outside of the ministry's permit, but we certainly have given some guidance within the policy towards that, and we are awaiting the National Solid Waste Management's finalization of what their plans are for e-waste.
So to
Certainly.
be clear, you're saying that that's not finalized yet.
No, you have to use the microphone. Remember,
Yeah, but it's a different ministry,
Ministry
so
of
I wouldn't be
Local
able to
Government.
speak to it definitively.
Okay.
but I get the feeling that he is still saying it's not the Ministry of Energy's issue. It's something for the Ministry of Local Government to finalize. And it has not been finalized as yet because unless you'd have been saying.
Well, I'd assume that your ministry would be integral in that conversation, though. So if it's not finalized yet, or if it is about to be finalized, I'm sure by now you would have heard.
I'm pretty sure we'll be told, but I'm not aware.
Okay. Christina?
From a dealer perspective, I can speak on one of the most stringent things that we had to have in place is waste management, because we can't carry in these cars and then 8 years down the line, because batteries have a lifespan, to turn around and look at each other and be like, what do we do with these? We can't fill a landfill. This is solid waste. And one thing we had to do was put together a plan for our brands. And internally, we have a plan. We had partnered with Tropical Battery on what we do with these batteries afterwards. I can't speak to the intricacy of what that is, but we do have a plan. And also going back to the technology of what these cars are nowadays with the batteries, how the batteries are created are not how they were beforehand. And they're made up of all of these different cells. So when we do our health checks and our diagnostics through our internationally trained technicians, we can look and see which cells have died in a sense, and we can replace that rather than replacing the entire battery. So that is something we also look at to see what from the battery itself, because the battery is one of the most expensive parts of the car.
Nikolai.
So part of the repurposing, again, speaking from my experience in Barbados, we've seen where used batteries that are end of life for the vehicle have been reused for golf cart, scooters, home charging, multiple use. And now with the changing of the technology, there are companies that are being set up to recycle the batteries. So it's an entire ecosystem that is being built around the vehicle, and especially the battery. Another thing that you should bear in mind is with the battery tech changing so rapidly, a car 10 years ago, battery would not last you probably 10 years. An EV now can last you 10 years and more, because the degradation percentage, if I'm not mistaken, on BYD is 1% per year. So at 10 years, you've only gone 10%.
You have 90%.
You have 90% left. So that's still significant going into the years.
Dan?
I was going to say what he said. So.
Okay.
Yeah, speaking to your point, and Christina raised the point at the beginning of the session, most of the industries use cars, right? And she made the point that with the technology advancing as rapidly as it is, you buy a second-hand vehicle, it can only go 300 kilometers. There's going to be a gap. So in order to get the industry going, and more specifically, a new vehicle industry, what incentives, particularly with the financial sector, can you say to the banks, for instance, well, listen, can you do something at an interest rate at 3% as opposed to 7, 8, 9, 10% to incentivize people to get the EV vehicles?
I do also have to commend the banks and the financial institutions. Many of the major players, such as Scotiabank, have a green loan, and what that allows is it's a different interest rate to a combustion engine vehicle. You have different processing fees and different terms because they want to push the adoption, and it's not only just for EVs but also for solo.
Is different better?
Yes, different better.
Right.
It's an incentive.
It's an incentive. But coming to... Sorry. Wait, you have to use the microphone. It's broadcast live.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, because they are seeing an adoption. There are some financial institutions which haven't fully adopted EVs as yet, but we have been liaising with them. They are in growth, they're in the process. We're providing them with the research, the data to be able to offer the financing, but there are some who are leading the charge.
All right. The incentives, you mentioned it. What incentives are, apart from just the bank loans, the better loans, the 1,000 vehicle, we have not even reached the 1,000 vehicle imports that the Minister of Finance about a year or two put in place in his budget speech. So it was an annual importation of up to 1,000 vehicles, and we haven't reached that as yet. But what other incentives are in place, or what would you all like to see being put in place to encourage adoption of EVs in Jamaica?
All right. All right. So I speak as a user again. For context, I bought my EV before there were any chargers. Even when I got my EV, no insurance company would comprehensively insure the car. I had to get third party, right? So it has come a long way now. You can get all of that. Even when I went to do my fitness, I didn't know how to do the fitness with the car, right? Because it didn't have an engine, no CC rating. So we have come a long way. And I think for mass adoption to happen, as we spoke about earlier, the age limit, something we can revisit, looking at the state of health as a metric for determining that car, that will allow us to bring in cars.
Of the battery.
Yes. So if we can increase the years, ensure that the batteries are good and safe to come here, we can bring it at a price point. I would say sub 3 million. Dion was talking about the taxi man, them getting the EVs. What's stopping a taxi man from getting an EV now is the price. If you can bring it down to that Axio price, something that him can save money, transport or save, probably not the Pro Box price yet, but we might get there one day, right? But getting the price down,
how much are Pro Box?
The visibility of it would be good, and persons will see EVs and how they work. It will also help the new car dealers as well. So I think looking at that section and also incentivizing solar PV installations with batteries, because I think they are a good couple. Persons, it will help with the adoption rate going up in Jamaica, I think.
I also want to just make a plug for fleets as well. I think that in Jamaica, we do have a large number of private and in some cases public fleets. I think that if you really want to, push this thing big time, I think maybe through policy, government incentives, something for fleets so that there's an incentive for them to bring in a large number of vehicles and really begin to have a higher level of visibility of EVs on the roads.
What are some of the, you want to go on, Brian?
Just to try and outline with regards to the incentives that are there. We all know aware that there's 10%, I think, import duty on electric vehicles. The Ministry of Finance has allowed some claim back in terms of taxes if you install solar panels as well. And so that certainly supports it. So there are things that are available, certainly within government's ecosystem to incentivize EVs. And hopefully persons will read upon it and make themselves aware of what's available.
What are some of the regulatory hurdles you all face in EV adoption?
I don't know. I don't know the definition of hurdles because.
Or let me use.
Yeah, use challenge because from a regulator perspective, we can have an issue with how you do the installation because it makes sense. It's from a safety perspective. So I think where the e-mobility space is concerned, it's more from my vantage point as a user and somebody who charges, is from sovereign all the way down. It's facilitating the growth and the process. There are some things I think we probably should see significantly more. Like Dan spoke about fleet. We should be seeing more buses on the road. It's kind of hard to ask a taxman to buy a EV if sovereign is saying go electric and they're not driving electric. So what Brian is saying is the government has a commitment for 16 and 12. What the government probably needs to do is to market that growth of the commitment for 16, so people can see that the government is buying into that change, is also steering that change. I think those are the things that people need to do because people really, they're skeptical about it. It's new. I had the opportunity of putting chargers down because I have a charging network, so I can follow where I drive. Now we can drive all over the country. Same thing with GPS. But for the user, they need to see somebody of influence believing in the product and the process and adopting it. But I personally haven't seen any challenges. I don't know how you guys feel on the user side.
No challenges on my side, but the example here needs to be the government. That's how Barbados did it with the government changing the transport board fleet to 60 electric buses, and that was the only time the transport board became profitable. It makes a big difference. We have enough example across the Caribbean in terms of electric fleets that data is there. I think it was at Secree, Barbados shared their experience with the savings that they've had and the improvement in service, everything for the entire Caribbean to see why they Bermuda adopted the Barbados model. Put in, I think they have about 40 or 30 buses there. So we just need to lead by example.
Dion, before.
Oh, just very quickly. So, I don't think I have a challenge with the regulator. I think the regulator has been, at least our regulator has been very strong in terms of their own commitment to e-mobility. With JPS, we are working through on the tariff side. I mean, we did have a residential TOU that was supposed to support, that's time of use, where, at particular times of the day, the rates are different. And the objective is to have persons charge that is not on the peak demand periods, right? So we're trying to push you into those off-peak areas where you get a nice lower charge, and so it would be a lot more beneficial for you. So this is one of the areas that we're working with regulators, not a challenge. In my own mind, I think that as we see the growth and expansion, there may be more opportunities in that space as you try to bring more people in. So I think that the regulator has been supportive, and we're looking at those opportunities, including the tariffs, to be able to support the expansion of EV.
All right.
And from the government side, we're aware of some of the challenges with regards to registration of EVs. And I know the Road Traffic Act is going to be revised to include how those are handled, and that's being looked at currently.
This is just an observation, last one for me. But in your opinion, why do you think that we don't see as many probably Teslas in Jamaica? Is that because I know they don't have a dealership kind of structure, but why do you think we don't see as many Teslas? I mean, it was probably the foremost Western EV vehicle. I mean, a lot of developed societies, countries, you see a lot of Teslas, but we don't seem to see that many here. What's your opinion? What's your take?
On my opinion, I think we've seen a lot more now. At one point, you didn't see them much, but with the price adjustment that Elon has been doing, with the prices coming down, now you can get a Tesla Model Y landed here in Jamaica for about $35. That's a certified used. 35,000. Sorry, $35,000. That's certified used out of the US, right? If you're buying from the UK, you budget about 40,000 to Jamaica, and I think landed, yeah, man. So I know of I don't want to steal his thunder. Tropical Mobility will be doing that some more. You have other players in the market that will be bringing them in. But I've seen them on the road. People have been bringing them themselves. I see them at the chargers parked up. So slowly but surely, I've seen ID4s, I've seen ID3s, the Toyota Pro Ace. I've seen the BZ4X. So more of them are coming. I see them.
I'm going to ask a pretty weird question here. We've been speaking about what's wrong with your win? We've been speaking about incentives to get people to adopt EVs. But what are the potential risks of relying too heavily on incentives? And how can we ensure a balanced approach that supports sustainable growth in EV sales?
I think Dean of
Well-
course a question for anybody else.
I personally, I don't see any harm in the incentives currently because, like we said, it's about early adoption. Persons buy into what they're familiar with, and going back to what you were saying earlier with, how will we get there? I mentioned that all of the brands, what we're launching nowadays will be some form of electric, and I can solidly speak for the next 4 to 6 months out that all of the models that we'll be launching will be electric. So when persons start to see it, and mentioning what they did in Barbados, with the more they see it on the road, the more comfortable they will be. But in terms of incentives, we're currently at a stage now where we need to educate, we need to incentivize persons, because it's not just about adopting the technology because we have to, but because we want to. It's sustainability, it's zero emissions, especially for a country like Jamaica, where the environment is important to us. We rely on tourism. These things will factor into global warming and are playing our part. And you look at other countries worldwide where cars that are sold that produce carbon emissions are more heavily taxed. We look at it now that we are in a very safe space where you can adopt that early without having those penalties.
But I'll say this, and this is the adoption amongst us as adults seems to be different to how the generation below looks. I'll use my son, for example. He's 11, and all he speaks about are EVs. And his first car is going to be a Tesla and stuff like that. So in their mind, it is adopted already. It's
Yes.
us.
Actually utilize the incentive now by the government to be able to bank on those savings, install solar, install and get those cost savings where you can now.
All right.
So just to put a fine point on what you just said about incentives, in every government, incentives provide that runway to start the ball rolling, so to speak, and get people interested in a product or an idea. And that's what the incentives that have been put in place are supposed to incentivize persons to move towards EVs. I know personally as someone who has switched from ICE, internal combustion engines, to EVs. He's now at probably his third EV right now, because he's seeing significant savings per mile traveled. So it is if anyone wants to just explore it for a moment, see what it does, you really do save quite a bit moving in terms of miles traveled, moving from an ICE car to a EV car.
Dion?
Yeah, just to support what Christina said, let's be very clear. The incentives are critical for us right now. We're still in a very early phase of development of the market. I think that that is important to plug because we are very price sensitive, very price sensitive. In fact, I wish the incentives were a little deeper to really trigger it a little bit more. But to your point, whether it's going to become the drug to keep the market going, right? So I think that structuring of those incentives are going to be very important to prevent that sort of scenario. But let's be very clear, the market is still very in its very early phases. It's my view you're going to need incentives for a few years well before the market gets mature enough to be able to take away the incentives or slowly take that, ramp them down, because this market is very important to Jamaica, and we should be very strong in ensuring that the commitments to make it work continue until we actually see it realized.
Okay, right, last question, Mr. Mackenzie. You mentioned earlier about tariff. Sorry, tariff. You mentioned earlier about tariffs, right? So I just want to get a better sense of if it is that this is granted, what you're asking for. Just want to get more clarity around the issue. If it is granted, what does it mean for Evergo's operation and maybe financial performance? How significant of an impact this will?
Well, I think I really don't think from the position of Evergo. I'm thinking about e-mobility. And what I'm saying here is kind of like what Dane was saying earlier, is you have a number of pieces that can make this thing move much faster. One of them is is how we deal with the tariff of charging. If you have a tariff to charge, which are not necessarily specific to JPSC charging rates. So for example, a time of use, meaning JPSC is, or the utility, let's use a utility for example. Utility is switching, is encouraging people to charge on the off-peak period, right? The reality station is the off-peak period is also that space where there's an abundance of generation, right? The ratepayers pick up that cost. So what they're basically doing is transferring that cost to EV chargers. What I'm saying is the fact that we're all users of a 24-hour cycle, you should have a concession rate for people who drive EVs. That's what I'm saying. So 12 to 12 is a rate that is which is lower than what a normal residential or industrial or commercial customer would pay. That's what I'm saying. So it creates that further incentive, more than a 66% differential between gasoline and electricity, but a 10 or 20% between somebody in a house and somebody driving an ICE, and somebody driving an EV. That's where I'm asking us to go with it, because then, if and this is the quagmire that JPS would face, if JPS is supposed to give incentives for people who have solar who overproduce during the day, because remember they have to build a grid to deal with all of the demand, and then you put something in to add to that. And then when you remove it from the grid, then they would have to, their grid would have to be so sophisticated to deal with all these bouncing of demand and release to the point where it's going to be costly as well. So it can be a very vexing issue. So all I'm saying is a simple solution is this: the regulator comes out with a charging rate, just like we have a charge for residential customers, commercial customers, and industrial customers. You do the same thing. And the issue of incentivization, though, Dashan, is it's really to pique an interest. And once you have the critical mass and the momentum, then it's not going to be so much of an issue. And the other thing that the dealers are doing, remember, we just saw this EV thing. The cars are really high-end cars. We're talking cars that are selling for 24 million up to 36 million dollars. That was how it started.
That's a Jaguar.
I don't know, but that's how it started. and then our Porsche Cayenne, and then we have BYDs, and they're bringing in MGs, and they're bringing in Kias. So 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 now, and Great Wall has its own brand. So now we have cars that are now competing with mid-range ICE for the same price with significantly less maintenance cost. So the young persons, the young people will now start to talk about the values that they are getting from these cars. And that's essentially what it is. It's just to pique an interest. And once the momentum starts and the critical mass is there, then people will buy.
But I want to expand a bit more on the tariff.
Oh,
You
God.
mentioned 12 to 12 and thing. You mentioned, I want to expand on what is it 12 p.m. to 12 a.m.?
Well, I'm saying on a 24-hour cycle, just have a rate for EV users.
Just one set rate, regardless of what time you charge.
Right. So you have a declare rate for residential, you have a declare rate for commercial, you have a declare rate for industrial. The time I use thing, it works, right? But if somebody do an analysis, they're going to say, well, JPS is enriching itself. It's really not. But the reality of the situation is that, what if I want to charge you now? If I do a timer use, right? If I apply for timer use, and for some reason I drive to, say, Negril and come back home, and my son plugs in that car during the peak period, you know how much my charge? My cost is going to be so high, because what they've basically done is create a penalty on charging during the peak hour and give you a reprieve during the low peak hour. All I'm saying, once you plug in that thing,
regardless of time of use,
regardless of time
of use,
it should be
have
cheaper.
one rate, and I'm presuming you want that rate to be lower than residential.
Of course, of course. Then I won't charge my chargers. Yeah.
And then if there's a 60% cost savings between petrol and EV, having a lower rate would mean a greater savings for consumers, right? Because right now we're charging at JPS.
And more EVs on the road. And cleaner air.
And what is
good rivers.
40 cents?
Quieter roads.
And even at 40 cents, we're still saving.
Yes. So we're getting that, Diane? Is that a commitment?
I love him, but not right now.
Okay. All right. But I completely forgot what I was gonna ask. All right. But I'm looking to the future, though. What role do you see for Jamaica in a broader Caribbean EV market? How can we position ourselves to be a leader in this space? I mean, I think it was Nick who mentioned there are 2,000 EVs in Barbados. They won't have range anxiety. The island is 21 meters wide, right? 21 miles wide. They won't have range anxiety.
Okay. So I'll take on that. Interesting you said that, because when I just started driving there, I had range anxiety, and that's because I didn't know the vehicle. So I didn't know whether or not it tells me I have 56 kilometers with my battery, but I don't know. I didn't think about where can I go with 56 kilometers from that perspective. But as soon as I adjusted myself with that, then I just drive until it tells me that I want to charge. The same way I would drive my ICE car until it gets to low and the gas light comes on. So looking at it from that perspective, it was easy to drive after that. Is what I mean. But your question was?
My question, how can Jamaica position itself as a leader in the Caribbean EV market?
Well, I would say more incentives are needed than what we currently have now. With batteries lasting much longer going into the future, then we can increase the age limit.
You're still on that?
Of
You're
course.
not giving it up?
No. But why should I give it up? And I'm saying that because it works. When you have that space where you're now looking, we're changing the game. We're now looking at the state of health of the battery prior to importation. That makes a big difference, as opposed to looking whether or not the vehicle is in good condition, right? Before it comes in. We're looking at primarily at the state of health of the battery. That makes a big difference. And if batteries are going to last longer, The degradation is small, a small percentage per year over the life of the battery. At 10 years, you have 90% of battery left. I'm not saying to go to a 10-year vehicle. I'm saying somewhere about 5-6 years is still good enough based on the quality of the batteries being made now. Our primary source market is Japan. Japan is not ready with EVs yet. So now we have to look at the next mature market, which is China, to get vehicles. We're getting them right on drive here as dealer vehicles, but any option they're going to be left on drive outside of that. So we have to look at a market that China, UK is also a good market on the used side for right-hand drive vehicles. They have a robust taxi industry using MG estates for those taxis, which MGs are coming here, which is one of my favorite vehicles. That's what I drove when I was in.
You're giving Christine another plug, right?
So I think with more incentives, the mass adoption will take place, and also price parity is also key on smaller vehicles. Still waiting for the Seagull.
Still waiting for the
BYD Seagull.
But one of the things is China, the left-hand drive vehicles, they're not exporting them. A lot of their EVs, they're not exporting them. They have ones that are produced specifically for the export market.
You can get them.
But you can get them. I remember the question, Wayne. The question is for you. The question is for you. The question was, you mentioned EVs being more environmentally friendly.
Yeah.
We have to look at the question of how we generate electricity, whether we use renewable energy, whether we continue to use HFO, whether we use gasoline, because it's hard to sell a concept to say, you have more EVs because it's more environmental friendly, but yet you're still generating electricity.
You know, kind of like, I love that question. I really love it. Because
ATL sells solar panels.
Yeah. And why I love it is,
you're on JPS, by the way, not you alone.
well, JPS could kind of have a mix of generation, but we produce HFO. We produce energy using HFO, electricity using HFO. Now there's a clear distinction between energy and electricity, right? So the transport sector takes 21% of petrochemicals, right? So when people talk about the hypocrisy of electricity being fossil fuel, replacing it with EVs, and in an aggregate, we're about 50% between electricity and transportation in terms of petrochemicals, in terms of HFO, gasoline, diesel. The issue of decarbonization is arbitraging, is reducing footprints. So if you reduce it on the electricity side or reduce it on the transport side, it's still a reduction. So my responsibility, and that's why I love the question they ask. Whilst on the electricity side, we are transitioning to cleaner and greener in the inter-energy group space, which JEP is included in. And one of our facility is in Damer, which is going to add net zero by 2030. Jamaica's ability to do that transformation is not as simple as they are, because they operate in a spot market. We don't. So we see where we could make that impact on the transportation side, which is why we have Evergo. So we're slowly chiseling away the counts and ICE and replacing them with EV. The net result is still a net positive to decarbonization. The country as a whole will get to that by 2032, where we're bringing in renewables and we're using cleaner fuel. So give us time, but it's not hypocrisy. We cannot do it dealing with it from one side to the next. So right now we're dealing with transportation. We'll get to electricity soon.
So before you come in, you want to add, Brian?
Just to say, just to do a follow-up and just add on. That's why the ministry is looking towards ensuring that we get to 50% renewables on the grid by 2030, and then we will go on to hopefully a net zero approach on the grid by 2050. And with that, certainly transport will fall behind. What we certainly understand is that there's going to be a lot of legacy in the system. Persons are comfortable with the ICE cars. And so that latency can only change by persons who are new adopters of EVs, and they put their stories out with regards to how they're saving, what they're seeing in terms of their pocket savings, moving from an ICE car to an EV car. And that's what we're hoping a forum like this will do as well.
All right, I'm going to follow up and then I'm going to ask this man and we have some questions online. I'm trying to wrap up in 10 to 15 minutes. Back on the grid, and you mentioned about phasing out some of the ICE vehicles with EVs and reducing the carbon footprint in the country. But there's a lot of investments that have been put in the ground by petrol stations who will be threatened by some of these EVs. People are spending billions of dollars putting in petrol stations all over the island. And we're speaking about putting charging infrastructure in malls, at supermarkets, at your dentist, at your hairdresser, here and there, which is taking away income revenues from petrol stations who are putting in things. Interest groups will normally push back. Interest groups are going to be sitting at the government and say, hey, you can't put me out of business. I'm putting money in the ground. How do you balance that interest?
Certainly, it really is weird because when we first went into the charging business, and I say we, I mean ourselves and JPS, you'd not believe who supported it. Petrol station, Total, Boot, Rubis support, Texaco supported that. So we started our charging network at petrol stations because we started, right?
What about the future?
So no. So these gas station owners, they basically look at the space from a responsibility perspective. So they're not saying, okay, I'm making money on gasoline, because they know they're making money on that, but they also have a collective responsibility to the country and the economy and the space that they operate in, and they do believe that they can coexist. You will still have those legacy persons like myself who will come in and fill a car because they need to move, but at the end of the day, you're going to have a shift, and they recognize that a shift is imminent. Even the dealers, how they position their car, where their workshop, how the workshop was designed and all that, they recognize that things have to change because the manufacturers are not doing it anymore. And so when we talk about, so we use the word slow down kind of negatively. The EV space was growing exponentially. So a slowdown and an exponential growth is still a huge growth, right? And so you have a Tesla who was protected, literally protected in a market space. And you have the Chinese who have some really sweet vehicles who are now doing the same type of range that Tesla is doing. And inside of them pretty like crazy, right? Not just one big screen that you can watch YouTube on. So people are changing. So the BMWs and the Mercedes and the Jaguars and the Audis need to realign again because these Chinese vehicles and the Korean vehicles are really nice, very comfortable. They do the same thing that these avant-garde vehicles are doing, and the performance and the ride is still the same, and the price point is significantly different. BYD have a supercar, which is 25%, 75% less than a Chiron. 75%, but it's faster than one. So a Bugatti, okay. Right? So we're talking about people who can buy cars that are affordable and give it the same thing.
You're in a different price range.
Yeah, I am. No, I am. So all I'm saying is this: I see the future for EV growing. I see gas station will change, they'll adapt to the changes, and they've already started to. Like those who are our partners, where our charging station are located, they're already starting. So I've no fear where that is concerned.
Really, the JGRA really sat down and say, okay, this is coming, where we know we have to adapt. Do we put in more petrol pumps? Do we put in more charging stations?
Well, we can say at ATL we have partnered with, just like we partner with Evergo and JPS, that we partner with many of the petrol stations as well. And these are multinational corporations who operate globally. And you have to remember as well that Jamaica is still developing, and in the developed countries, they have already made all these plans on how they will adopt. they're not looking at it as a loss in revenue. It's just literally a shift because, as we mentioned, as we move forward, there will be more EV sales, there'll be more persons needing charging. And you actually look at where the charging stations are now, that majority of JPS charging stations are in a petrol station, and very similarly with Evergo as well. So it's just a shift.
But Evergo and Charge and Go will replace the petrol stations eventually.
Well, these MNCs, these petrol stations are already making plans on how they will adopt and how they're shifting the change. So for Jamaica, it's just a matter of time of when they implement it and when they choose to implement it.
All right, Dion wants to respond first, and then Mr. Plug in Jamaica.
The fact that is that the energy sector is evolving. It is changing. Where energy is electricity, energy is fuels is changing, and the business models are changing all around. And globally, as Christina said, they also see a big part of their business models to be sustainable. They have to demonstrate their sustainability. So they're actually excited to be a part of the conversation and to encourage. Yes. So the fact is that just in terms of the future of EV in Jamaica, I think that nationally through our policy we have set a very, very ambitious target. We see ourselves as being leaders in this space. The issue for me really is about us executing on that program to get to that point. And I think that we have a very robust collaboration that is happening right now. The utility, the dealers, the enthusiasts, government, regulators. How do we, ramp up that energy a little bit more to actually realize this kind of step change or increase the exponential? And I think that's the thing that we probably need to just figure out. And I think these conversations are important because it highlights that we know what we want. The question is, how do we actually close that gap to reach there? And I think that we have good collaboration. So at least we have a foundation there.
My name is Howard Kalash from Plug-in Jamaica. My question to the panel is, the BYD Seagull is a very popular car currently now in Asia and is just landed in the Australian market. What would be a reasonable price point for electric vehicle adoption in the current Jamaican market?
Thank you. We actually did touch on that a little earlier, and we were comparing it to the fact that Jamaica is primarily a used car market. So until we reach that price point which I believe we are, because we have mentioned that we are also launching MG, and MG is one of the most electric advanced, offering a diverse set of models. And we had mentioned before that when we first started EV debuting in Jamaica, it was more the high-end models. It was the Jaguar, it was the Audis, the BMWs. But now moving forward into 2025, we're going to have hatchbacks. We have the MG4 EV. We have subcompact SUVs. We're going to have the Kia EV5. So we're going to have more attractive EV pricing than we have ever seen. You're looking at $5 million for a new car, which is a SUV and comparable with other price points, because based on the rate of exchange, that cars are increasing because we import cars. So you're going to find more now that I think we're at the next level of adoption with volume electric cars. But unfortunately, to answer your question, the BYD Seagull is not available in our right-hand drive, so we're unable to carry it for our market.
And the volume cars are not the BYDs.
We will have, so BYD, yes. So we do have,
volume.
but BYD is at a very attractive price point. And you have to look at that. Jamaica now, compared to where we were in 2020, ATL started this conversation to get the BYD contract 3 years ago. It took us 2 years to secure it, and to have the confidence to bring in a new energy vehicle brand that BYD only produces battery cars, and not just cars, but forklifts, garbage trucks, buses, etc. To have the faith in our market, that speaks volumes that we are committed to having a new energy vehicle brand in Jamaica.
But you're pushing BYD as a premium brand right now, not as a volume.
Well, BYD offers premium features. Have you seen them?
Yes.
At a price point to match, but starting at 6.995.
Yeah. My next follow-up question will be to Wayne. At what volume of electric vehicles need to be in the market to, let's say, bring the charging hub that was currently completed in DR to Jamaica?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
for your parent company, Inter?
Yeah, I don't think it has anything to do with the quantity of vehicles. I had a conversation on this with Neville last year, I think it was. Again, they're operating a spot market, right?
Okay.
So the hub that we have in there is powered by Interenergy. The concept for that is a solar with battery solution where you have convenient stores within that hub and you have charging space. If I put solar panels for a hub and I put batteries in the hub, I can't sell a charge because we're prohibited from selling that charge. But JP will do that charging hub sometime down the road, I'm pretty sure. And I don't know how many vehicles they'll need, but Diane is here and she can tell us how many vehicles they'll need to. But it's a very, very good idea though.
But Diana's been pushing the fleet. It seems like she's been.
No, the fleet is a solution to EV.
Right.
It makes a lot of sense. So one of the good things, you spoke about us as leaders in the EV space. I don't see selling vehicle as a definition of leadership. Coming from JPS, one of the things that Jamaica did and was adopted by Cayman was our regulation, the OUR, the equivalent of the OUR, they call it off-reg in Cayman. And they adopted the same model that OUR used, right? We have a very aggressive e-mobility and decarbonization plan where the country is concerned. And I think as leaders, what will drive other countries to look at us, based on the conversation we're having earlier, is if we have policies in place that support an industry, we have dealers that support it by providing provision in the cars, and we have users that are educated like what we have here to, in a forum, describe what is happening, and we have curious journalists who will write about it. And if people see these things, if people see these things, then they'll understand that Jamaica is not just about saying what they're going to do, but they're doing what they're going to do. And then we have an Evergo. Sorry, Diane, I have to plug this now. We have an Evergo who has a network here, and one of my EV group members can call me in Uruguay and say they see a Evergo charger, and if they can charge with their RFID card and say yes, you can do it, then you know it's about going somewhere.
All right, we have a few questions from online. Maya? Yes, we do.
And the first
We're
one
gonna
is
take
for you,
about
Mr.
4.
Mackenzie. All right, so the first question is, what are the concerns or hesitations of proprietors regarding the hosting of EV charging stations?
I mean, at the petrol stations or the
So our host partners or potential host partners, what are their concerns or hesitancies when we approach them?
One of the issue that we have is particularly like the spaces in the malls. They believe that because you have so many ice, to give up a space for EV just is not worth it. So we spend a lot of time convincing them that it's not just a responsibility to the decarbonization process, but also their collective responsibility to the transition. But we really don't. Most of the times, what we have more people coming to us to ask us to put them down. The issue is the configuration of the grid, particularly for a level 3 charger, because the type of voltage that it uses it comes straight off the primary lines of JPS, and so Dion will have our JPS will have a substation, right? And they do have primary lines up, but we have somebody living 40, 50 miles from it, you just have a single line going there. So to get all of these 3-phase going into that particular community, it's going to cost a lot of money. Yeah, but microgrids, microgrid is for reliability and security, right? It's not for that type of business. So the issue is, and it will affect Diana as well. So when you do your overlays, your map overlays, and you see where you want to put your chargers, you probably recognize that distribution system is not built for a level 3, right? So those are some of the issues. But we do get a lot of people asking us to put chargers down.
Second question from Moya.
You don't have any question for Dion in that?
It's not
But
she
this
write
one
them,
is
you know, she
good.
just-
These
she
are
just-
online
she
questions.
just a
I'm just the
messenger.
messenger.
Okay.
Alright, so the next question, I think that will be for Dion and you.
Dion and you.
Someone is asking, what about higher charger speeds? I think it's charging speed. And they
I
said
raised that.
China has a charging speed passing 350 kilowatts.
I did raise that.
Yeah, you did
Yes, so
raise
when I
that.
buy a
So I
car,
mean, we
I'll
have
buy
been,
EV.
as Wayne explained before, we have been steadily increasing the capacity of our chargers. We're at 150 now, but remember, there is a vehicle also have to have the capacity to take that kind of power into it. So it's a balancing game, right? So we think we're 150, we're on par. Christina can confirm with the battery technology of the vehicles that we have here. So once we begin to see the vehicles that can take higher, we'll be going higher as well. But just to respond quickly before you ask the other question, about the grid, I think that policy-wise, in terms of placement of chargers, is going to be very important, right? Because clearly, we want to have a structured way of ensuring access to the chargers. So when I hear we talking about the grid is not built for three-phase chargers, we have to be careful with that statement, because what we want to be able to say is that as a country, as a utility, we actually have agreed as to where are the best places to site this type of infrastructure. So you don't actually have it in locations that maybe are not the most optimal, right? And so we can we don't end up investing beyond what we need to invest, right, for this kind of infrastructure. So I want to just balance the statement. I understand the point you're making, but I think that we need to make sure that as a country, we're optimizing that dollar spent for where we're putting this very heavy level of investment as
They're
well.
going to be in pockets.
Yes, yes.
And not necessarily mass rollout.
In terms of chargers.
Yeah.
So we're talking about hubs. We think that hubs, we probably need to cite some locations where you have a high density of chargers. Right, as well as
It's for Wayne as
distributed,
well, so Wayne needs to
as
answer
well
as
as distributed. You have to have it across the island, but in particular zones, high density charger availability is going to be required.
So
as
the
well.
St. Elizabeth lessons you learned have not been learned. Because anyway, wait, let Wayne answer.
Let's complete that conversation quickly. No, what I'm saying is that right now you still have a distribution matter, which is a St. Elizabeth thing. That's the issue. But I've moved beyond that to say, as we grow, you're going to also need to have locations with high density.
Wayne, take the mic, Wayne, because the question is for you as well.
I think that's probably our problem. So if we get, it's like the other day when one of the governments, so they're doing an RFP and they use substations as possible potential interconnected points. If we get something from the grid operator, so these are points where you can put level 3 chargers, these are the location, and you do a map, then I don't have an issue with that. What I have an issue with is you have 3 phase, and it dead ends here, and a host wants me to put a charger here, 1 or 2 pole span from here, I need to spend $5 million more. That's a problem. So if
that's why I'm in Jamaican, right?
Yes. Okay. So if I can, so my cost has now increased by $5 million when it really shouldn't. So if I can get something from the grid operator, say, boy, okay, at Esotel I can put on 200 kilowatt of chargers, right? And we have a host there. Then I can go to that host and say, okay, can I park here? But when somebody coming from Nigel, and there's really for us, we have nothing between Boardwalk and Montego Bay. And we want to put something between Boardwalk and Montego Bay. But everywhere that looks well, we have to build some, so we have to add to the distribution line.
What's the distance between Boardwalk and Montego Bay?
Just remember that once you're adding costs like that,
probably about.
Who is bearing the cost? Right. So we have to.
Yeah, you were speaking. If you use the microphone.
Yeah. So right, yeah, man. So the person bearing that cost has to put that in. I'm bearing that cost, and if I can get, so I'm putting a charging station to facilitate. I'm putting a charger to facilitate the transportation of people right along a corridor. So if that transformer doesn't get added load, our customers over 3 years, and I lose. If you get 100%, 3 years plus 2 days, I lose all of the value of that transformer. If I get it 2 years and 90% of the other year, then I can recover some of my cost. And I'm saying the recovery, if JPS, if the grid tells me that this area has potential for level 3 charger, and this area has potential for level 3 charger, then the guys who scout will only focus on customers within those areas instead of going all over the country trying to find somewhere. And then when we find that place, I have to spend $3 million, $5 million to improve the infrastructure. That's all I'm saying.
And that's the cost you want JPS to pick up.
No, I don't want. If JPS could tell me that it is there, like what the government did the other day with the bid, they're saying you can evacuate 50 megawatts from this substation. You can evacuate 100 megawatts from this substation. You can evacuate 25 megawatts from this substation. I know what my hurdle is. I know, right? So if I'm going to put 100 megawatts into a 25 megawatt substation, I know what my cost is going to be. Okay. So I know I'm going into an area which is one pole span from a dead end, and it's costing me $5 million. That just don't make sense. Yes, sir.
All right, Christina, quickly, will you be bringing in the BYD U8?
The U8, the Yangwang U8. We are currently looking at the market based on the Yangwang U8. It's almost like a mega truck in a sense that can swim, it can do anything. We're waiting on costings, but we do have plans. I can just quickly mention, we do have plans to launch the all new Mini Aceman, which is an all-electric new model for Mini, the new Panamera 4 SE Hybrid, which is a Porsche, the all-new Porsche Taycan, as well as the Audi Q6 e-tron and the Kia EV5, all of which are all-electric models in the next 3 to 4 months.
Any other question? That's the last one.
The U9 also follows with the U8, but I can confirm we will have the BYD Shark, which is going to be an all-electric pickup. Sorry, it's a hybrid pickup.
All right, I think we're at the end. I see a very last question, which I think is a little controversial on this paper, and I'm just going to ask it anyway. What does the future of autonomous electric vehicles for Jamaica look like, and how soon can we expect to see them on the road? Autonomous EVs, not just driver, but the driverless ones. So Wayne won't finish a battery in one day.
That is a very long. That has a very long horizon. There's a lot that has to come into play before it can be contemplated locally, and so it's certainly something that we will look at, but it's not something that is currently medium-term contemplation. So it's a very long horizon for that.
Oh, you want to answer, Christina?
No, it's just actually a question. If you're following EVs, you'll see that Norway introduced a charging road.
Yeah.
What would you think be our timeline to get one of those?
but Norway is an EV paradise.
It certainly would be. It would certainly have to be cemented in policy first before JPS.
Cemented and not asphalted.
And that's a long way.
All right, I think we can come to the end of this. Dane wants to say something.
I like that you brought up Norway.
Yeah.
What Norway did is that they used up the resources that they have. Yeah. I think it's hydro. It's the main source of power there.
Yeah.
We need to look at what do we have here in Jamaica. Columbus said what? Land of wood and water, right?
But we import water though.
Why we shouldn't be. We should be encouraging beyond just EVs, just looking at holistically. I mean, how we harvest rainwater, how we harvest the sunlight, wind energy. We're surrounded by the sea, wave energy. There are so many opportunities that can tie into e-mobility, sources of energy that we can look at. And I think that is something more not long-term, but mid-term that we can look at to tap into for source of energy for EVs.
All right, I think we can end right there looking at Evergo Jamaica's e-mobility forum. I want to thank the panelists. Christina Taylor, the group marketing manager for ATL. I think you should bill her for the amount of plugs she gave ATL today. And a charger, right? And Wayne McKenzie, who's the president and CEO of Jamaica, Evergo Jamaica at this point, right? Brian Richards, who's the CTD, the Chief Technical Director in the Ministry of Science, Energy, telecoms and transport. And Nikolai Cowan, the Secretary for the Jamaica Electric Vehicle Association. Dane U. Kalash, Director Plug-in Jamaica. And the last but certainly not least, Miss Dion Nugent, and she's your favorite power station business development manager here in Jamaica. Thank you all for joining us here today. And that's it.